My name is Elena Marlowe. I am 32 years old, and after years of working as a civil engineer in Richmond, Virginia, I finally bought a modest three-story townhouse near the James River, a place I had furnished slowly with second-hand bookshelves, framed photographs, and a little sunroom where I planned to spend quiet Sunday mornings, never imagining that the greatest threat to my home would come from the people who had spent my entire childhood telling me that family was the one place where I would always belong. 2 years after moving in, my widowed mother, Denise, called to say that she and my younger sister, Tessa, had lost their rental unexpectedly, while my brother Marcus was struggling after his restaurant closed. And because I had always been the person everyone turned toward whenever life became difficult, I agreed to let them stay for what I believed would be one peaceful month while they found another place, provided they used the downstairs guest rooms, contributed toward groceries and utilities, and respected the locked study where I worked remotely. For the first few weeks, I convinced myself everything was manageable because mom cooked dinner, Tessa helped with laundry, and Marcus kept promising that interviews were going well. But gradually, my house began changing in ways nobody bothered to ask me about, with my furniture pushed into corners, my books removed from shelves to make room for storage bins, my dining room converted into a makeshift bedroom, and my carefully organized kitchen rearranged according to my mother's preferences, while Marcus began parking his motorcycle directly across my garage entrance, as though the driveway had somehow become his property. When I finally reminded them that our original agreement was temporary, my mother smiled sadly and said, Elena, you're making this sound like a business arrangement. While Marcus laughed and added, you act like we're strangers renting a room from you. And although every part of me wanted to answer that strangers actually respected boundaries better than they did, I swallowed my anger because I still believed that setting a firm deadline would be enough to restore the home I had worked so hard to build. Then the deadline passed, and instead of packing, my family began behaving as though they had received permanent permission because Tessa started bringing home furniture without asking. Mom replaced the curtains in the living room, and Marcus installed a massive television on the wall while casually telling me that his girlfriend would be moving in soon because there's plenty of space upstairs. And when I objected, my mother pulled me aside and accused me of becoming selfish simply because I had achieved financial stability before everyone else. The moment that truly changed me came one rainy evening when I returned from a 14-hour project inspection and discovered that the lock on my private study had been replaced. My desk had been moved into the hallway, and Marcus was inside the room using my computer. So when I demanded an explanation, he leaned back in my chair and calmly said, we figured this room was wasted on you since you're hardly home. Before mom appeared behind him and told me that the family had decided the upstairs floor would now be shared territory. I did not scream, threaten anyone, or throw a single person out that night because something inside me had finally become very still. And instead, I went into my bedroom, opened a new notebook, and began documenting everything with dates, photographs, receipts, messages, utility statements, copies of the original agreement, and records of every conversation in which my relatives admitted that they intended to remain in my home indefinitely. 3 days later, I met with a local housing attorney named Rebecca Sloan, who listened without interrupting, examined the paperwork, and then told me something that frightened me far more than any family argument had, explaining that because my relatives had established residency and received mail at the property, I could not simply change the locks or put their belongings outside, but I could begin a formal process to reclaim possession, provided I followed the law carefully and stopped treating the situation like an emotional disagreement that could be solved around the dinner table. When my family received the first legal notice, the atmosphere changed instantly. Because Marcus accused me of humiliating everyone, Tessa cried that I was choosing paperwork over blood, and my mother stood in the kitchen holding a mug with both hands as she whispered, after everything we sacrificed for you, this is how you repay us? But for the first time in my life, I did not apologize for protecting myself, and I simply answered, I am not asking you to stop being my family. I am asking you to stop treating my home as something you inherited without my permission. Their reaction became even more aggressive when Marcus insisted that he had spent thousands improving the property, even though most of the purchases had been made without my approval, and my attorney calmly requested receipts, dates, photographs, and proof that I had authorized any of the alleged improvements, leaving my brother suddenly unable to explain why the person who claimed to be helping the household had no written permission from the actual homeowner. The case eventually reached a hearing on a grey November morning, and sitting across from my family in a courtroom was surreal because these were the same people who had once crowded around my birthday cake, borrowed my car, celebrated my promotions, and told me that no matter how successful I became, I would always have a place at their table, Yet now Marcus sat beside his attorney while my mother stared at the floor and Tessa repeatedly folded and unfolded a tissue as the judge reviewed photographs of my altered rooms, financial records, written agreements, messages, and the timeline I had carefully assembled. When Marcus finally told the judge that he believed family members should be allowed to support one another without strict technical rules, the judge looked over her glasses and replied that compassion could explain why someone opened a door, but it could not erase ownership rights or transform permission into permanent possession. And when the ruling required my relatives to leave the property within a specific period, return my private rooms to their original condition, and settle the lawful expenses connected to the dispute, I felt no triumph at all, only an exhausted relief that the boundary I had been too afraid to enforce had finally been recognized. They left before Christmas, and the morning after the moving truck disappeared round the corner, I walked through every room slowly, finding scratches beneath furniture, nail holes where paintings had been moved, faded rectangles on walls, and a tiny red crayon mark beneath the staircase that Tessa's little boy had apparently drawn during one of their visits. Yet instead of seeing only damage, I saw the painful lesson hidden inside it. Generosity without boundaries can quietly become permission for people to consume everything you offer. I changed the locks, restored my study, donated the furniture they had abandoned, planted lavender beside the front steps, and eventually invited my mother for coffee again. But this time I made it clear that forgiveness did not mean surrendering my boundaries. And when she asked whether I would ever trust my family the same way again, I answered honestly, I can love you without handing you the keys to my life. Before opening the door to the home I had finally learned was not selfish to protect. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.